In this video, we'll be looking at contestability. I'm quite aware that this is a topic that people get quite confused about in A-level econ, and so yeah, we'll just be clearing things up there. So the first kind of definition that we need to know in regards to the topic of contestability is, what does the degree of contestability mean? Well, first of all, what is contestability? It's just a contestable market is one that's very open to competition. And so the degree of contestability is saying, well, how open is the market to competition? If you've got a high degree of contestability, then you're working in a contestable market that is very open to competition. If you've got a low degree of contestability, it's not a contestable market, it's very close to competition. And so if we look at the market structures, we can kind of look at how contestable are they, where we've got perfect competition all the way up to monopoly. That perfect competition is very open to competition. Well, why is that? Because it's got no barriers to entry, there's perfect information. And then we've got the monopoly, potentially natural monopolies, the startup costs are huge. There are incumbent firms that have large economies of scale. It's a lot harder to set up shop, and so it's a much less contestable industry. Okay, so let's look at our key characteristics of a contestable market. First of all, in order for a market to have a high degree of competition and contestability, we want there to be potential for supernormal profit. Why? Well, because that's what's going to attract people into the market. If you had a market where no profit was being made, then no one's going to want to enter. You'll have, not high competition. And then we have low barriers to entry and exit. So similar to what I was talking about before with the monopoly example, if it's very, very easy to enter a market, maybe it's cheap to enter, there's not high levels of brand loyalty needed, existing firms don't have really high economies of scale, then again, it's going to be more easy to set up shop in that market. Finally, by the general nature, these markets are very highly competitive because there's a lot of firms in there due to these two factors above, making it an attractive place to operate. So let's just look at the potential for supernormal profit. So in a contestable industry, incumbent firms, so firms already in the market, they'll be making a supernormal profit. We can show this in an exam through the cost and revenue diagram, just showing profits are greater than zero. We can denote this as, an attractive industry, a contestable market. And so this is going to attract the attention of potential entrants who also want to profit. And because our barriers to entry are low, entrants, they're going to enter the market, taking some supernormal profit and then exiting when the market is no longer profitable. And so a contestable market, you're going to have firms entering and leaving in order to extract profit, and they're going to leave when that profit is all gone. And so another thing that we really need to analyze is how are incumbent firms going to react. And in this case, incumbent firms don't want their industry to be attractive to potential entrants because those entrants are taking their market share. And so, quite ironically, incumbent firms, and this may seem like it goes against profit maximization objectives, they reduce the profit that they earn. Maybe they revenue or sales max instead of profit maximizing in order to avoid attention. So if we were to graph these scenarios for an exam, we can do that as following. So a situation that would attract entrants, that's going to be the situation where we have that positive supernormal profit. So we're going to draw our normal cost revenue diagram. So cost, revenue, quantity, demand, which is also our average revenue curve, our marginal revenue curve, our average cost curve, and our marginal cost curve. And so, we want to see what's our profit maximizing condition. That's where MC equals MR. That's what firms are going to produce at. Our costs are going to be when we go up to hit average cost. Our revenues are going to be up to where we hit average revenue. And our profit, which is revenue minus cost, is going to be this little square here. And yeah, if we were doing this in an exam, we could draw this diagram to show that this could potentially be a contestable market because positive supernormal profits are being made. Okay, now how are incumbents going to react? Well, we know that incumbents don't want this competition. They don't want high profits to entice individuals or to entice businesses in entering the market. And so they're going to artificially reduce their prices in order to, get rid of that attractiveness. So what they might do is they might instead, price at different objectives. So maybe MR equals 0. So they're producing at Q1. That is going to reduce their profits from that yellow box. And their new profits are going to be this like red box here. That's one way we could do it. We can still see that profits are positive, and if barriers to entry are like significantly low enough, that still might attract people. And so the other thing that they can do is they can completely get rid of their profits. So they can charge or they can price average cost is equal to average revenue. Now if profit is equal to revenue minus costs, but costs are now equal to our revenue, then our profits are going to be 0. And so if we this is sales maximizing, if we price at AC equals AR, we've got absolutely 0 profit because our costs are equal to our revenues, and that is going to make the industry just not attractive. Okay, so now let's look at some barriers to entry that might exist. And so we know that a contestable market has low barriers to entry. And so when deciding, is this industry contestable or is it not, we need to think about the various barriers to entry that industry might have. And so a barrier to entry is a restriction on the ease of access into a market. So we can have brand loyalty. This is particularly strong in the soft drinks market. People are very loyal to, you've got your Coca-Cola fans, you've got your Pepsi fans, you've got your Fanta fans. If you came in with a new alternative, people are probably unwilling to switch. We've also got switching costs. For example, like termination fees. If you're on a specific phone contract, in order to switch to a different contract, you might have to pay a fee. And that's just going to make people unwilling to switch. And that's going to be, a cost, or it's going to be a barrier to entry if you're a new firm trying to enter the market. We also have resources. So, some resources are expensive to acquire. Some resources like, skills, that can be a resource. The founders might just not have it. They might be in scarce supply. And if you don't have those resources, it's going to be harder to start up because you need to find people that do have the resources. Acquiring the resources, the skills might be costly. Leads us to our next point, which is startup costs. This might be true for like manufacturing businesses because you need to like have a factory. You need to invest in machinery. That's all going to be very expensive, and not everybody has that amount of money. Finally, we have the economies of scale of competitors. Now, when we look at our economies of scale, we're looking at this average cost diagram in the long run. So LRAC, we've got quantity, we've got average cost. Now, as we move along, as we're outputting more quantity, average costs are falling. And so incumbent firms, they're likely to have been in the market for a while. Potentially they have maxed out their economies of scale. So they're operating at that minimum efficient scale. Now, if we're a new business, we've just entered the market, we're going to have a low quantity of output. We've only got a small market. So we're outputting at Q2, our costs are at C2. Now, say that this incumbent firm, its costs are all the way down here. If he prices here, he's still making a profit. But we can't compete with this price because our costs are above that price. And so economies of scale can make it significantly harder for new firms to compete. Finally, we also need to consider barriers to exit. So these are the costs of exiting an industry. If the firm is looking to enter in a profitable time period in order to leave when profits dry up, that needs to consider certain things. First of all, the sunk costs. These are costs that are not recoverable. For example, advertising expenditure. If you were to leave the industry, you're not going to get a refund on all that expenditure. We've also got contractual obligations. There's still things that you need to carry out. We've also got redundancy costs. So you've got to pay employees a certain amount if you want to leave the industry. Okay, so our final kind of feature is that a contestable market is going to be highly competitive. That's kind of self-explanatory. And so, finally, we want to kind of look at the implication of contestable markets for firm behaviour. So how are incumbent firms going to react? And now, first of all, it's kind of, we've already spoken about this, but the incumbent firms might want to reduce their supernormal profit in order to reduce attention from entrants. They also might want to implement measures to enhance barriers to entry. So potentially they're going to spend more on advertising. Potentially they're going to expand operations to get more economies of scale, just to make it, again, less attractive for new firms to enter. They also might just want to become more competitive. So if they invest dynamic efficiency, they're going to gain that competitive advantage over new entrants. You know, customers are going to want to remain with that incumbent firm. Additionally, you know, just incumbent firms in general, they want to be X-efficient. So X-efficiency refers to, you know, does this firm have like wasteful spending? And so the more lean an organization, the less wasteful spending, you know, the more price competitive it's going to be, the less likely it is of being a threat from, you know, new entrants. Finally, these incumbent firms, they might want to employ price and non-price competition. So non-price competition kind of refers to that investment, you know, making your product better. And then price competition rather just talks about, you know, reducing your prices in order to gain a competitive edge. So limit pricing refers to pricing below the average costs of your competitors, which is what we looked at in this example here. You know, the new entrant is cost of C2. We've priced at P, which is below C2, and so we'll be limit pricing. Okay, and so just to end, I'll give you guys an exam question to give a shot at. That exam question is, to what extent do contestable markets lead to greater economic efficiency? Now, it's quite a good exam question, but it's quite a tough one. It makes you consider and combine different topics like efficiency and contestable markets. But yeah, that's it for this video. The main thing with contestable markets is understanding what it is, the characteristics, and how incumbent firms are going to react in the market.